It's Dr. Bab. I'm recording what's probably the last video on the Sherman material, pardon me, here in the last week of the course, where there's a last section here that really talks about the business intelligence applications themselves. And um, you really, okay, all right, I don't know what that was all about. You know them fairly well from just running something like this. Sure, I want to connect to the data. Oh, I see. Right. So I guess if you open up um, if you open up something that connects to MySQL, it's going to want to connect again, which makes pretty perfect sense to me. So let me give this thing what it wants. For me, there we are, and we have some of the magic, which is something I was showing from a previous video. So at the end of the day, you really want to pull the purpose of all this, and it's actually, you perhaps might be shocked, and you maybe didn't even enjoy it, and I would understand and I would accept the criticism. Um, it would have been pretty easy just to make this all about Tableau. Let's just do fun things with digested data from Tableau. But we went pretty long in the midterm, not for some of you, but for some of you, you turned it in pretty early, and um, there's been a bit of a lull. I gave you the uh, final project parameters a few weeks back, and so you could focus your attention on that. But we effectively um, have kind of not focused on too many of the deep mechanics of Tableau, and I just feel like Tableau is pretty easy, and this is not the first or last time I will have shown this. I think most of what you need to know is from these training videos. Um, I think a high majority. I guess I watched all these originally with not the account I'm in. I think I had to go in with my academic account for some reason. Anyway, um, each of these should be fairly sufficient. In fact, even this process of showing how I was able to get some of these to map here, some of these flight segments, is more or less from some of the materials covered in these. So, in many ways, once you've got the content specified, then effectively um, you really want to start looking at, well, what are some of the applications? And some of the best applications are frankly these kind of desktop suites. So we talk about the who, right? So in chapter 13, there's the who, and we basically have, the casual users. And this is essentially who you're making this particular product for in this class. There could be analysts, right? And analysts are going to need something more. There could be people they call power users. They're a bit above the casual user, usually because they have some proclivity. And then we can actually have somebody just literally called a data scientist, which is essentially somebody far elevated above and beyond analysts or anybody else. And in many ways, no, thank you. Um, the data scientist would do a deep dive, be learning tools like R and maybe the D3 visualization and Python visualizations and getting into really advanced predictive modeling. And we're really just not there. We're kind of taking the broader view of this. Now, I think that there are subsequent courses that could focus on this. So you at the end of the day want to think about um, layouts for dashboards. So dashboards are going to take a number of visualizations, not unlike this Tableau visualization, and lay them all out together. And some of these dashboards are covered here in terms of dashboards and stories. So don't forget, I asked you all to think about making a story. So in terms of building a dashboard, I mean, one of the principal reasons, I didn't even prescribe a book for this is because, this is going to be, hello, this is going to be decent right here. This is going to be more than sufficient. So, excuse me, I just, didn't see the need to get into that too acutely. Um, so you're going to want to think about being consistent, keeping it simple, going with really kind of a standard, easy to use colors. Just kind of take the defaults as much as possible. You're going to want to look for filters and slicers. We particularly have filters in here, so you can see that if I stick anything in the filters area and I actually show it, then these filters are able to, like for instance, let me look at the Airbus family of aircraft, which none of which go into Amarillo. But if I clear out the route, then I can see quite a few um, that fit the bill all over the world for this Airbus family of aircraft. So, excuse me, filters really help you out. Um, and this tool, probably these are screen grabs, I would guess from Power BI. They could be from, sorry, from Tableau. They could be from Power BI. I used Power BI previously. I used Tableau this year. I think it's a real toss-up. I don't really favor one or the other. They both can be obtained freely. They both actually cost money. I think Power BI is a little bit better because it connects into Excel. Just wanted to try Tableau this year. Um, so oftentimes then you really have to think of um, sort of designing your data for this self-service BI. Here's another dashboard, by the way. Designing your data for this self-service BI. This self-service BI is exactly what Tableau is. So, and you've been doing that. In fact, I focused significant amount of time in our course together and having you obtain and prepare data just so it could go into here. Putting it into repositories that you control, getting it to be standardized and normalized, and other types of things. So, as a result, um, you've got a lot of good experience with that. And because you're actually preparing for this self-service end user BI, there are going to be other opportunities for inconsistencies. And that is actually in that last step between going from your repositories into the things you had to do for basically using that Tableau project. So I demonstrated some of these just in actually going into here and having to play some games with this custom query. Having to, here we are, let's go to edit the custom query. Let's make it a little bit larger. And this is where I had to do this concatenation, which here it is, sorry, right here. So that's, an additional manipulation of the data. If I really needed that concatenation, shouldn't I prepare it downstream? The good news is since this creates a manipulations as a part of the import, I'm not really changing the downstream data, but I'm sorry, upstream data, as in where I got it from. Downstream, though, is that what if these then start to feed other systems in the organization? And if these do start to feed systems in the organization, then we might have some issues. Because if we go to data then effectively we can see that this has a number of data sources, including my SQL server. Um, and we're able to actually um, publish some of these things. And that's how they become something that could be exposed downstream. And that's what this tool does. And we have experience with that public service that Tableau offers. So we just need to think that there are always going to be threats to the 5 Cs um, at every turn, right? And so as the data becomes augmented, starts to shift semantically depending on the user, the eye of the beholder, sometimes not able to be linked together, or it can just be inconsistent. So um, we then need to think about different types of analyses. So for instance, do we want comparative analysis, right? So comparative analysis, it usually lends itself to bar charts. Is this more than that? So that's a good example. Sometimes we want to think about um, trend analysis, or sometimes called contribution analysis. This is what um, Sherman calls it. So as I would give you an essay to write, you want to think about um, the visualization you're producing and ask yourself the question, are you trying to do a comparison? Usually some sort of um, time series or trending analysis type of thing. Do you want to do a contribution analysis where we try to see, what um, kind of what contributes to what basically? But these actually are comparisons. Let me not get ahead of myself. These are comparison analyses and trends analyses. And so let's just kind of keep them in mind. So this is one principal type. Trend analyses is another principal type. Some trend analyses lend themselves to area. So this is the contribution, actually, the contribution analysis. Um, Here's another trend analysis. Another way to look at a contribution analysis is a heat map. So the shape of the boxes, I'm sorry, so the extent of the boxes plus shading create the story with respect to, um, you know, intensity, right? So to kind of basically get that sense. Um, so contribution analysis is another. These are all from chapter 13, actually. So correlations, and this can be done in Excel, but essentially correlations just say, as this varies, how does that vary? And more importantly, is you can start to develop some regression trends through these. And regression trends would kind of give you that sense again of how do these covary and correlate. And that really captures movement, right? Um, so you get a sense of outliers and things, Now the trend line would be usually left right here, but outliers are usually deviations from that trend. So I don't know how many of you are going to have this in your data, but this chapter is certainly important. Um, then there's just geography mapping. And by the way, just as a brief aside, I was doing something wrong in one of my last videos, but effectively, the more things you want to show in here in terms of mapping, you'd have to drag each of these into um, the columns rows so that they can become part of what's actually distributed here. And what I mean by that is what is um, mapped, right? Look at that. Looks like I screwed this up again. And then you put these guys on detail, and here we are. And then looks like, yeah, I really kind of blew that because I really want airport to be in here again so I can put it on label, and then there they all are. So that's a shame. All right. So I mean, we focus on a lot of these just because where is always an interesting question. Um, and then of course, box plots with whiskers are always really fun, and it just shows you distributions, right? So basically, I think you could pick up most of chapter 13 just by paying attention to the Tableau videos. Right? Now, what if you want to go beyond self-service, things that you buy off the shelf, right? What do you want to do if you actually want to start building your own product, right? Um, this is what sort of the design and development chapter is about. And that's really where, and I guess you'll know this if you watch this video, this is where I'm telling you, particularly as we get beyond chapter 13, I didn't want to deprecate the entirety of the section, but we're not getting into this, and there would be light fare in the uh, final exam on this. Having done that, what would you do, right? What do you want to do when you basically say, okay, well, two things. What I'm about to say isn't necessarily exclusive. It does not exclude or preclude the use of these self-service off-the-shelf tools. It just means it could either be for BI, in-user interactions that you want to design from something you want to specify from cobbling together a number of tools, or even just how you're going to utilize existing tools. So we generally want to go, and this is, by the way, you could replace the word BI here with just application visual design methods and you'd be fine. And that's probably why I would include some aspect of this chapter. So you typically want to get a sketch then, and the sketch just essentially says, hey, based on kind of known standards and based on my own conceptualization of what I or other people want, um, how do we basically start this design? But I guess what I would say here from the book is that a precursor to this are are there design standards, um, particularly for UI, where that is an in. And some things to think about, and again, it's from the book, but are there standards as they relate to layout, right? Oops. Are there standards? And by the way, a lot of these standards can just be gleaned from web standards. So let me just say, use web design standards as a guide. No, I don't want to open up any kind of game bar guideline. Um, so with respect to layout, um, with respect to basically common elements, and that has to do with things like text, colors, space, wow, shapes, etc. Um, and then are there some delivery platform concerns, right? So you actually learned how to work with the delivery platform in terms of configuring LIMP, right? And then are there just some standard um, visualizations, visualization elements, let's say? And the answer is yes, and we just got finished covering them in the previous chapter. Perfect. So then as you design these applications, we basically need to, progress through these steps. Generally, you want to start with a sketch, progress to a wireframe. Now, a wireframe is essentially a mock-up, and we got some examples here. So the sketch here is that, they call this the proverbial napkin sketch. I'm just kind of, this gives you a sense of their initial unrefined vision. Then you start to get into actual screen proportions. There are plenty of great tools that do this. Um, I'm trying to find one that I like um, that I almost always tell my students about, and it's Balsamic, and it's not the only one. And this one's uh, free, um, but then not free, meaning that you can always use a demo. Um, I don't want to start the free trial. Usually there's a demo they would let you run. I guess they might have stopped doing that because, let's see, balsamic demo. Here it is. I don't think they make it easy to find, but this kind of gives you Flash Player. Good Lord. They've kind of really changed a bit. Anyway, you get a sense here. Um, you can kind of make sketches, wireframes, um, and it gives you this opportunity to interact with these types of folks. So we go from the wireframe stage to storyboarding. And all storyboarding is it starts to put in kind of flow chart like, how do we go from this vignette to that vignette? Um, and storyboarding is actually a kind of a film um, technique, storytelling technique. Um, so it comes from, theater, animation, that kind of thing. So in a lot of ways, storyboards were just a way you kind of know storyboards because they're useful in gaming as well because they just kind of look actually like cartoons, right? So I imagine progressing from here to here to here, and you would imagine the sequences, but each storyboard frame is there to just capture the essence. So then you actually would go all the way up to a mock-up, which kind of says, this is what I believe the application would look like. The prototyping pretty much follows not too dissimilar a set of steps from the software development lifecycle, systems development lifecycle. Define the prototype, create the prototype, test it to see that it hits each of the functional requirements, have users test it, get their feedback, revise it, and then sign off on it. And the prototype is there to kind of prove that, hey, this is how something could work. But again, like I say, this is not unlike the application development lifecycle, where you essentially, except for this is a kind of a rapid prototyping, and that makes sense because it's so visual, and it's there just to convey uh, oftentimes visual analyses, right? Where the predictive modeling in BI is actually usually not as great, right? Um, it's not absent, but BI lends itself a lot more to these dashboard type applications. So you would actually have a BI server, which presumably is some extract or uh, filtered and curated materials from your data warehouse. You're going to have some sort of schema test data to kind of make sure that everything you tend to do with live data is real. And you want to get your content and prototype that out, prototype out your visualizations, combine the two so that you have your BA application. The actual testing of itself is that here it is. And what a unit test is, I mean, it's in the book, but a unit test basically is a one-to-one mapping between production code and things that prove that it works. So this is from Martin Fowler, who's a pretty well-known guy in the software world. And what I'm pointing at the screen, I think this thing highlights what the mouse does. What each of these represent, each of these brown cubes are a unit of functionality, right? And I'll use the word functionality purposefully because it's usually a method or a function in code. If you need to see a method or a function in code, um, let's go back to our good friend idle, which we've been using all semester. And our good friend idle, 362 is out, by the way. I guess I got to update. Um, let's open up this one's fine. This is me helping a student. Um, those def statements are functions. So we'd want to build tests that prove that these functions work. Okay, great. So the developer has his or her unit tests, and the user has her or his unit tests, and each of these are kind of a filter. The developer's got to be satisfied. Of course, it's conceivable that they could miss something. They throw that over the wall to the user. Then we basically have the applications in use. So that is other applications alongside the one you're using. So we have to then do integration tests, and then we have to do acceptance testing to see that the BI system performs as is standard. You can substitute each of these just for systems in general, and you basically are going to have the same deal. Now, chapter 15, moving right along, chapter 15 discusses advanced um, analytics. And advanced analytics just says what are that's pardon me, what are the different predictive analyses and other data mining techniques that are possible. And so what advanced analytics does, what advanced analytics does is basically um, it gets more into estimating the future and facilitating what if. Okay, those types of questions. So basically, when we say analytics, it's often code for things like predictive modeling and data mining, right? The data mining feeds the predictive modeling, and they can actually be almost used interchangeably as an umbrella. This actually becomes the subject of other courses in the curriculum, which is one of the reasons why we'd really want to taper off at this stage. We definitely want to be able to, the reason we mine is to look at historical information and derive or even glean trends from that data. Um, so you better believe people like Google, Facebook, Twitter, who deal in large amounts of data all the time, and people like Amazon and really anybody. But what goes into this? And so let's take this higher level view, which the chapter does well. If we want to get into this predictive modeling or data mining, what is a methodology to adopt? And effectively, Sherman offers us a project lifecycle that says you first need a decent opportunity to do some data exploration and data preparation. And you would do that iteratively or in an agile fashion. And the reason you would do that is to build, test, and evaluate models. So this is where your statistical modeling, predictive modeling person, this is usually, a good 18 hours in mathematics, somebody who's really able to get into some advanced statistics, um, statistical inferencing, and all these types of things. This is why the uptake among mathematics departments on calling themselves data science or data analytics is acutely on the rise. Taking these types of courses in a computer information systems program, you can see we've had a more systems focus and bent, particularly in the last several weeks where I've had you really worry about getting down in the weeds with the data. So the data exploration and data preparation are processes that are typically facilitated by data mining. And so if we want to look at this, we can kind of actually conceive of some tasks. Let me pull that off to the side, go into here, and let's look at some of these tasks. So one of them would be, what is the project scope, right? How many functional areas of the enterprise are you dealing with? What type of external data do you need? You can think of the midterm, I just gave you a very limited scope. One thing that you imported that was static, one thing that you had to call from a service, even though a lot of you are probably going to end up using static versions of that. So it was really two different obtaining. Now you have to do some exploration. And the exploration is really best accomplished with data mining um, your data warehouse. Then we basically need to ETL, cleanse, uh, data warehouse, check for the 5 Cs, right? That's the preparation. Now that you feel that it's amenable to modeling, we can use really something like R. And R um, is not the only tool, but a fairly common tool, and it'll appear in other courses in the curriculum. But let's look at modeling in R taught by this fellow. How about no? How about leave me alone? Where we have things like, so what are they doing here? And they'll do things like linear regression and logistic regression. So you certainly need to worry about regression. By the way, regression is typically going to come up when you're thinking about correlations, particularly multivariate correlations, multivariate models. How do many things covary and correlate? Making generalized linear models with R, analyzing longitudinal data, so how does it change over time? And then basically creating generalized estimating equations. So these are kind of real bread and butter elements of that. Here's a guy, similarly, decent article. Perfect way to build a predictive model in less than 10 minutes in using something like R, right? He's going to, how about you leave me alone? Give you some steps to execute on, and that kind of thing. All this stuff, of course, being in R itself. And again, a little outside of the scope of the class, but these last couple chapters in section 6 are. Then, of course, you need to use it. In a lot of ways, this kind of reminds me of this really emerging phenomenon called DevOps, where the whole premise here is that we're effectively kind of doing one of those loops to begin with, right? Test, build, code, plan, release, deploy, operate, monitor, development, operations, development. It's just kind of having two different uh, coincident loops talking about how we refine processes. Generally, you're going to get a lot more of your um, specialists when you're doing this. What I mean by specialists is you're going to end up getting a lot of your data scientists, analysts, the types of people in the organization you hire for this, unless, of course, you're so small, you're having to wear multiple hats and do this yourself. So um, we want to make generally in the book he talks about having um, kind of an advanced analytical architecture that sort of is a manifestation of those processes here, where you want to gather in all the components that get you the data, so all the feeds, all the sources. Again, go to your data warehouse. You're thinking about distribution for statistical or data mining and your analytical data marts. Don't forget, your analytical data marts are effectively going to be we already know that we need to look at these things. It's not R&D, it's not exploratory. On the other hand, in statistical or data mining, we have analytical applications, oftentimes extracted out, and something like R, even the classics like SAS will do this as well. And there are other, obviously, other tools for data science beyond these. Python is actually totally fine to do all this as well. And this then is going to feed various types of business intelligence outputs. Analytical applications, a step above that would remind me of R, or basically something that kind of does reporting and spreadsheets, kind of more classic Excel, or something like Power BI Tableau, which is right here. Generally, you get to here by building either an analytical sandbox, which effectively gives you a playground to do these testing, to do this product development, or an analytical hub, which really kind of serves generally the same purpose, but it kind of unifies the data sources, and it's a lot more of a unification of the previous. Architectures could be effectively that for predictive analysis, we're going to do predictive modeling, textual analytics, so something like Beautiful Soup and natural language processing for Python come to mind, data mining, and we used a little bit of Beautiful Soup way back when, about a month ago, when I was showing, hey, what if we screen scrape that flight data? And I told you it was possible. Then I said, hey, it's against the rules that these people set out, and I moved on. But I did demonstrate that it's feasible. Forecasting and econometrics, stats, operations research, these are all actually really bread and butter things that exist, particularly forecasting and econometrics. Stats and OR, even OR, has been around for a while, and that's just effectively just the optimization of the supply chain and things of that nature. You better believe somebody like Amazon is pretty heavy into OR. Then we have our disparate and myriad sources here. That's the hub. The sandbox, you can see, segments out the sources really, and that becomes the difference. And that isolation could have some of its own advantages. Again, we're really drawing down on this chapter. I'm going to, just for completeness, speak to this chapter in the next one, but you heard it here. Really up through chapter 14 is what I'll ask on the test. I'm not going to ask about advanced analytics, and I'm not going to ask about these shadow systems. But what is meant by data shadow systems? So data shadow systems are sometimes called spread marts. Spread marts are frequently seen departmental systems, usually spreadsheets, that the more technically inclined members of the business groups create for their coworkers to use and gather. So I'll stop right there. In-user computing is kind of the benefits and drawbacks of end user computing. And we say this to mean that there are these little systems that people appropriate out of need. They can't wait for the central solution. They don't want to ask. These are all over the place. Little spreadsheets. In fact, why do you think I wanted you guys to get this stuff out of spreadsheets and into a database? Just for the hope that somebody else can connect to the database and we can start to unify our data. So there are plenty of advantages, and the advantages are you can get something done without having to coordinate with other people. You can get something done in a way that makes sense to you all. But some of the drawbacks, and let's just go straight for the drawbacks. The drawbacks are, well, there is lost productivity when you have to re-understand when you're trying to integrate these data sources, these systems, to understand what was going on, what were they thinking, because they're rarely well documented. There are going to be data errors. This is just the entropy or chaos of data. It wants to be chaotic. I know that seems weird. Hey, I've committed a 1 or 0 to a disk. What are you talking about? It's use that introduces this. It's also not plugged in. That goes back to the project. I wanted you guys to get it into the database because it's updatable. When it sits as some static file in your drive, it's not. Um, it has some scalability issues. Again, why did I get it out of the spreadsheet? Because I think the database server was meant to have multiple transactions and retain its integrity. It's also risky because it's not necessarily part of the enterprise backup strategy or approach. It's outside of normal discipline, right? Because essentially, somebody saw the need to not ask IT for this, to not enter into the normal channels. And I can relate. I feel this way all the time, even in my own experience with organizational IT. I want to have some way to do it myself. Here's a great case in point. It might have been better off if I had you guys not stand up the VPS, but use some sort of canned solution out of the university. The VPS has advantages, but also has disadvantages, right? You had a tiny expense related to it. By the way, don't forget to turn those off when you're done with the class. If you're not interested, just kill it. Um, so there's always ups and downs to all this. As a result, there's no audit trail. And finally, there's no documentation. So I'll even use our own experience um, with these VPS solutions. In fact, what you'll find in some of the submission details that I'll adjust prior to you turning in this final project is that I'll need you to export your data, um, and you can do this in PHP I'll need you to export your data so that I could have a prayer of recreating your work. Because if you shut down your VPS and destroy your submission into the public repository um, at Tableau, then I it may as well not have even been there, right? So I'm going to require that you give me a quote unquote hard copy. But you can export data, um, and basically you would create a new template name like flight data, and you don't have any existing templates, and you would say, how do you want to push it out there? Do you want it to be JSON? Do you want it to be CSV? Do you actually want it to come out as SQL? I'd actually recommend SQL. It's actually going to import the easiest. Then once you've done that, and you definitely want to hit custom, as in like which one do you want to export? You notice some of these built-in ones are not exportable. Um, then you can get a dump of this data, and I'm going to ask you to compress that and then send it to me. And I'll actually probably make a separate video that does that because this one's embedded in the middle of a video that I don't even know that everybody watches. I do this because this is an online class in lieu of a lecture. I wanted to have this material for you. All right. So those are some drawbacks to having these shadow systems. So they're usually because the functional units in an enterprise and an organization are fairly siloed. They're siloed by the hierarchy of management, so that is the governance structures, siloed by functional interests, by subject matter. These people are likely to start to develop shadow systems. And these shadow systems, their nightmare is the uh, convoluted network of associations that they might represent. Different things being plugged into different things. It just becomes this spaghetti that is fairly nightmarish. So here's somebody who is using an Access system, and there's essentially different ETL plugs into it. Then they push it out to various different Excel systems. And so each of these stages along the way represent feeds into a separate shadow system here, which actually are derived from your sanctioned data sources. So think about this. What this means is that people are doing extracts from your central data systems in different threads here. They're all aggregating into different Microsoft Office products. And then think about this. Some external stakeholder, internal stakeholder, decision maker, power broker, boss, auditor is looking at that and saying, that's fascinating. I like that. Where did it come from? Or I said the word auditor, horror of horrors. We have a real problem here. Where did that come from? So this is the advocacy in this chapter to say, gee, um, you better be careful. And with that, that's it. And that actually is a great segue into material I'm not going to cover, but just pretty much says at the end of the day, it is all about people, processes, and politics. Um, at the end of the day, it's going to be a conglomeration of these things. Sometimes I've heard it called the eighth layer in the ISO layering system in terms of standards for networking. It's that political layer that always exists. There are always people involved, so there's the, um, I guess, frailties of that versus the advantages of that. I'm going to cut it off. That's the end for Sherman. I hope you like Sherman. I did. I find that Sherman's treatment, even though it's about 3 to 4 years old, is very comprehensive. I would probably pick Sherman again. Um, you don't have to maybe like my synopses of it, but I can promise you it's a really succinct primer and what exactly is going on with this phenomenon of BI and how it ties in everything else. So thank you for your attention. I'm going to cut it off and that's it. I never did make videos for the other book and my the Knaflic book. My big motivation is that was just kind of a flavor book I gave to you to think about some things in terms of he bases a lot of his work on Tufte and Schneiderman and just basically really good best practices in terms of how do you design to tell stories, how do you put together data visualizations so that you're able to kind of give convincing stories. So as that book went through things like think like a designer, focus your audience attention, these are all things that you can think of above and beyond the tools that you're using inside Tableau. So I probably wouldn't select it again, and I would accept any criticism that said, "Why did you make me get it?" I think that the Tableau videos are sufficient, but this person had a pretty reasonable, studied examination of the topic, and just for those who really love to learn and wanted more, it's there for you. Sherman was the essence. All right, I'm going to cut it off from here. Thanks for your attention, and I'll probably see you in a couple more videos for the class, but we're definitely winding down here. Okay, you take care. Bye-bye.